to the APRM Secretariat in Midrand and to the media. Okay, I see we're getting some nice numbers of attendees. We're up to 14 and 13 panelists, which makes us 27. So I did say I'll wait 5 minutes. I'll keep just chatting informally for another 2, and then we'll go at 10:05 according to my computer watch. We're also delighted to be partnering with Tessa Dooms and Josora Consulting for this program. I think Tessa adds a lot of experience in the NGO sector, in particular working with youth. One of the unique things that we're very delighted about that we're experimenting with in South Africa is working almost exclusively with youth, but certainly on issues that matter to youth. And we're going to hear a little bit more about that a bit later. Maybe I can also just talk about some of the people who are joining us. If I go back to look at the program, there's myself who'll do a very, very brief introduction to the program and to the APRM. We're also delighted to have Mr. Thulani Tshefuta, who's the newly elected chairperson of the South African National Governing Council. So Thulani, thank you very much for making some time. There'll be a short response by Dr. Patrick Sokela from the Department of Public Service and Administration, the lead partnership on on the APRM. That's the lead department. We're hoping to be joined by 3 colleagues from Southern African countries that have been through a similar process, including Graham Hopwood, Director of the Institute for Public Policy Research in Namibia, Susan, who we've already spoken to, from Zambia, and Maipelo Pale from the Botswana Council for NGOs. We're also delighted to have with us Lennon Moniai from the APRM Secretariat, who works on youth issues, and Tessa Dooms will be doing the closing. Okay, so we're up to about 30 participants. I think we're going to formally start. So I'm going to hand over to Helen Badegaard, who is at the Swedish Embassy in Addis and is the major funder of this work. So Helena, would you make some opening remarks? And if you wouldn't mind just unmuting, there we go. Great, go ahead.
Thank you, Steve. Good morning to everybody, colleagues and friends. It's a pleasure and privilege to address you this morning. Unfortunately, there are far too few opportunities to meet in person these days. As Steve said, I'm working from the Swedish Embassy in Addis Ababa, from where I run a regional program for Swedish development cooperation with Africa. And we are all involved in long-term work for democracy. This is something that requires patience and commitment. Seldom do we see sudden or instant victories. Most often the work to build and protect democracy and rule of law is long-term and cumbersome. It's about institutions, it's about trust in institutions, it's about fundamental values on everybody's equal value and rights. It's about space to organize, freedom to express and put forward ideas and hold power holders accountable. It's about having an environment where opposing views can be put forward without fear of repercussions or violence. And how a country is governed is the business of every man, woman, boy and girl who lives in the country, as citizen, as migrant worker, as refugee. And we should all do what we can to involve people at all levels in our society organizations or networks. The Africa peer review mechanism is one important vehicle for consultations and dialogue where different aspects of governance in a particular country are looked into and subject to discussion. It is an opportunity for civil society to put forward priorities and your perspectives, not the least perspectives of vulnerable and or marginalized groups. And we are very happy to see that you want to capitalize on this. There are regional and global dimensions to all governance aspects, and I really want to encourage you to make use of regional and global civil society networks to strengthen your advocacy work. The Swedish support to APRM is particularly targeting gender equality, youth, civil society participation, since these represent important Swedish priorities. And consequently, we see SIA's role to facilitate and push for an active participation from civil society in the process as very strategic. And we do wish you all a productive session today and a fruitful process ahead. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Helena. Thank you so much for making the time, and also for the generous support that you've given to make events like this and programs like this a reality. I think it's been a long-standing partnership that SIA has had with the Swedish Embassy and with the Swedish International Development Agency, and we hope it continues, and it allows us to help African civil society get much better at the long-term challenges that you've mentioned. Luanda, I just want to check, sorry, I don't have the program ahead of me. Is it me next?
Steve. Yes, Steve, indeed it is you.
Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing this particular screen and I'm going to share my presentation. I'm going to try and get through it quickly. You'll be happy to know. Okay, can you see the presentation?
No, Steve, we are not able to see your presentation yet.
Okay, maybe it's coming up still. Okay, sorry. Let's try again. Share screen. How about now?
Affirmative, Steve, we can see us.
Okay, great, thanks. Let's kick off. So yes, this is really about introducing our project, which is called SAPS, and it stands for the South African APRM Popular Sensitization Project in South Africa. We have a similar one in Botswana, which is called BAPS, and we have one in Zimbabwe that's called ZAPS. So lots of acronyms, but this is the South African APRM project. And this is part of a workshop that we're giving to civil society. Let's get this thing to work. Okay, so what I'm hoping and we're hoping to get out of the workshop today is to inform and educate South African civil society and especially youth about the APRM and the opportunities that it presents for you and your organizations. We hope to learn from other APRM country experiences, and as I said earlier, we are delighted to have representatives from Namibia, Botswana, and Zambia who are a little bit further along in the process and have all worked closely with SIA, and I'm hoping that they're going to give you tips and tricks and learnings and lessons so that if we make mistakes, we make new ones, not the same mistakes that other people made. We're going to highlight the key entry points for civil society and youth. And what we've decided in South Africa is we're having a very youth-focused submission development program. This project is all about us working very closely with youth groups and youth organizations and even individuals to help you decide what the key governance issues are for young people in South Africa, why they're a problem, evidence for that problem, and what to do about it. And that will all culminate in putting together what we call a written submission. So it'll be a lengthy document or not so lengthy document that outlines those sorts of areas. I'll go over it again in the presentation, but it's about issues that matter to youth. And I'm sure you have at the top of your mind some idea of what those issues are. We hope by the end of the day to set up a civil society working group with those of you who are interested in volunteering or being part of that group. And we will do a lot of communication via WhatsApp, and Tessa's going to talk a little bit more about that a little bit later. And we're going to explain how to develop this written submission and talk about some next steps. I'm going to try, because not everybody was on the call that we had last month, in less than 5 minutes talk about the APRM in the simplest possible terms, and I call it APRM in a nutshell. APRM is Africa's voluntary governance, review and promotion tool. Established in 2003, it grew out of the new Partnership for Africa's Development and the thinking around Thabo Mbeki's African Renaissance, and in the last couple of years, it's become a specialized organ of the African Union. It works on the belief that dialogue, peer pressure, diplomacy, and civil society involvement can support and spur and enhance reform on policy. It measures adherence to African and global standards. So there are in each section of the report many documents such as the African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance, the Maputo Protocol on Women, the document on constitutional changes of government, and so on and so forth, in 4 broad thematic areas on democracy and political governance, economic governance and management, corporate governance, and socioeconomic development. And the country that fills in this report reacts to a very long questionnaire that asks many detailed questions. The principles of the mechanism is that they must be technically competent, credible, and free of political manipulation. Institutions are set up at national and continental level, and I'll come to those shortly. There are different sorts of reviews. One of the most important is the self-assessment that the country does. So if you're in an office and you have a performance review, often you are asked to evaluate yourself. So that's what the country does. Then it hosts a mission of African experts who also do that review, who react to that report and do their own investigative work. And eventually the head of state is reviewed by his or her peers in the APRM forum. And then the country is tasked to develop, fund, implement, and report on a national program of action. So if the self-assessment is the diagnosis, then NPOA is the cure. So far, 40 out of 55 African states have voluntarily joined. 22 have had a first review, 3 have had a second generation review, and 3 have gone through what's called a targeted review. So, we can talk if you want a little bit about the throughput of the process. Needless to say, it is quite slow, and it takes years for countries to ramp up and be ready to be reviewed. I'm going to talk very briefly about the national structures. There's a focal point who's usually a minister. In our case, it's Minister Senzo Mkunu from the Department of Public Service and Administration, and he oversees the whole process and is the liaison between the national and the continental process. Then we have the National Governing Council. It's been newly elected. The chair is Thulani Tshefuta, who is joining us today, and he comes from, amongst other things, a strong youth background. So I'm really looking forward to his remarks. There's an APRM secretariat locally, which is at the moment set up in the Department of Public Service and Administration. We also are hopefully joined by Dr. Patrick Sochela from the DPSA, who does a lot of the administrative work in keeping the process moving. And then a little bit later on in the process, the National Governing Council will select and hire or work with technical research institutions that will help put the report together. At the continental level, there is the highest decision-making body is the Forum of Heads of State and Government. At the moment, it's President Cyril Ramaphosa, who is the chair of that forum, and he will be for this year and for next year. We have a panel of eminent persons, which is 7 to 9 very respected Africans who are in charge of the review in different countries from the Secretariat side. And for us, if my information is correct, it is Bishop Dennis Salamao Sengolane from Mozambique, who is the panel member. As I said, the minister chairs the Committee of Focal Points. From the APRM Secretariat, the national, that's the Continental Secretariat, the contact is Dr. McBride and Kalamba. And then a little bit later on, we will have a country review mission that comes to the country. How does this move forward? Just an extract from one of the founding documents about the role of civil society. The APRM process is designed to be open and participatory. Through a participatory process, the APRM will engage key stakeholders to facilitate information and national dialogue on good governance and socioeconomic development programs, thereby to increase the transparency of the decision-making process and build up trust in the pursuit of national development goals. So if anybody questions, why are you involved? This is not your process. It's easy to go back and quote this to them to say, actually, in the rules, it is essential for civil society to be involved. A few very quickly on why the APRM matters. It tries to set new norms of openness, frankness, and transparency. It's unparalleled in the breadth of what it covers. That questionnaire covers almost everything you can imagine under the sun. It's also in the process of being updated for contemporary issues, and it covers a lot of sensitive subjects like corruption. Honest reports assess governance at a particular point in time, and they identify salient issues and common problems. They open up political space and try to normalize debate and criticism. They can act as an early warning system and support policy reform. Second reviews allow comparisons. So South Africa is about to embark on its second review. It has already been reviewed once in 2007, and that was a very comprehensive and also controversial process. But yeah, once the second review comes, you can see how far you've moved from the first review. And 2007 was a long time ago. It also helps to strengthen the national brand and convince other countries to join. And of course, as Helen has said, many issues don't respect boundaries, as we have found with the coronavirus, but also climate issues and migration. So we have to look at also South Africa in the region. Okay, so in my last few minutes, I'm going to talk about the particular program that we are proposing here. As I said, South Africa joined in 2003, the APRM. Its first review was in 2007, and its second review is due next year. The institutions, the personnel, and the plans are still new. There's new people in DPSA, there's a new governing council, and that means I think they will be open and interested in the work that we're trying to do. Organized civil society can push for inclusive, transparent institutions and processes. That's very important. South Africa is a ostensibly well-governed country, but there are many challenges which exist, including poverty, inequality, unemployment, the separation of powers, corruption, weakness in state-owned enterprises, state capture, the environment, extractive industries. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but these are some of the obvious issues one has when looking at South Africa. And as I said, we want to build on the SIA experience of training and empowering civil society to develop a written submission. If you just go to meetings, and yes, you may make wonderful points from the floor, unless it's written, you can't use that for further advocacy or for further work. So it's really important to focus on the written submission that we want to come out of the process. And we've done it in a number of countries. I think there's 7 on that list: Botswana, Lesotho, Namibia, South Africa, Tanzania, Uganda, Zambia, and we're going to be starting on Zimbabwe very, very soon. But this works. We've shown that this is a model that works. So how do you create a submission? We have a little document which we will perhaps post in the chat, but also you can find it on our website. It's called Mastering the APRM, Creating Your Submission by Terence Corrigan. It's a little bit old, but it's still absolutely bears fruit. So it's important to make yourself heard and raise the issues that matter to you and that you're passionate about. You need to know the rules. You don't have to wait for government. You don't have to wait for the NGC. We can start immediately on putting a submission together. And here are the five steps of that. Firstly, identify the issues. I urge civil society not to try and tackle the entire APRM questionnaire, which is 105 pages. Don't do them all, but focus on the really, really important issues, but then link them back to the self-assessment questionnaire. Make sure that the issues that you are explaining and unpacking are linked back to the relevant objective in the self-assessment questionnaire. Secondly, gather and analyze evidence, your own evidence, but very importantly, government's words, government's promises in government reports. What have they undertaken to do, and how much have they done? Thirdly, develop convincing written arguments and solutions. Don't just criticize, come up with constructive constructive ways of going forward, circulate the draft for consensus and building allies, and then submit to the right places at the right time. The proposed timelines and methodologies for this program: we want to form an APRM working group and select key focus areas, collect research, commission CSOs and experts. We will also be commissioning a background paper for South Africa and putting it all together. So there's this training workshop in September. Then we want to have another APRM working group where we can reflect on this, either still in September if we have the time, or in early October. Start developing the submission between October and January. Put the report together, hopefully aim for a validation in February, and hopefully the report is concluded, and then we work on a dissemination strategy in March. It's very fancy. And with that, I thank you. That's how you can get hold of me on email. @rhymeswithbruised is my Twitter handle. And please, 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 if you Google on Facebook, which is a contradiction in terms, but if you search on Facebook for Engage APRM, you will find a very active Facebook group of about 600 people from around the continent at the moment, who regularly post info on APRM around the continent, ask questions, interact. The CEO of the APRM is also on the group. You can ask direct questions. So please, please do that. Thank you very much. I'm now going to pass on to the next speaker, and let me unshare my screen.
Sorry, Stephen.
Yes.
This is Tessa. Before you
Tessa.
move to the next speaker,
Yeah.
I just wanted to make an announcement to everyone about two things. One is that unlike the last meeting, attendees aren't able to use their mics and videos, but I am encouraging everybody to please put your comments or questions to the panelists into the chat group as soon as you have them. We will also have 2 interactive sessions today. In those interactive sessions, you will be sent a poll, and you'll be asked to just give some input via the poll. So please note that even though you won't be able to speak today, today you will be able to ask questions. Today is really about getting information about the previous versions of these kinds of activities, and to make sure that we understand the process. So it's important for us to ask questions so that if there's anything we don't understand today from our guests, we can get that right, and then that will help us with the process going forward. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Tessa. That's a useful intervention. Thank you very much. Luanda, the next person on the list is Thulani. Am I right?
Yes, Steve, that's correct.
Okay, so I'm going to mute myself. Thulani, we look forward to hearing your remarks. Thank you. If you can just put on
Good morning. Good morning, Steve, and good morning to all colleagues who have joined us here this morning. As indicated, my name is Thulani Tshefuta, the chairperson of the APRM NGC in South Africa. Still fairly new and learning the ropes. We want to take this opportunity and thank the leadership and management of the South African Institute of International Affairs for engaging us and giving us this opportunity, but also maybe it may be prudent to indicate that we had an opportunity of inviting Steve to make a presentation in our induction session, which was held on Friday, the last Friday, which immediately unearthed some of the lessons and experiences about APRM, which we immediately started integrating into the work that we were to do almost immediately on that day. I think there has been a consistent interest on the side of the South African Institute of International Affairs on the matters of the APRM. And we particularly want to thank that interest, because if we do not have society being mobilized to take interest on the affairs and the issues of the APRM, even us as the NGC, we will be doing it for ourselves. And that on its own will be going against the principles of the APRM. I think the preliminary or the initial presentation by Steve has laid the basis of basically positioning the APRM as an African-owned and led process of self-assessment. It is a process through which peers in Africa are opening themselves into common learning from each other, so that experiences that are acquired by one are shared with others, so that others do not commit the same mistakes that those who came before them had committed, so that those who are at the helm now are able to draw lessons from those who came before us and integrate those lessons into our plans in advance so that we're able to move forward. The hope, colleagues, is that after all that is done, it will all lead to good governance. And the important thing about the work of the APRM is on its principles, that one, it must have national ownership, and national ownership will not be achieved until every corner and every sector of society can identify with the work of the APRM, which basically starts with these types of sessions. Secondly, all processes of the APRM must be participatory and inclusive. We must take an extra effort to engage even those that may be holding different views than us, because this is not about us, it is about us hearing every view and any view that will go into enhancing the governance for the benefit of the people later on. And as Steve said, that we must always guard by all means to ensure that the processes of the APRM are technically competent, credible, and free from political manipulation. Otherwise, the minute we begin to compromise on the quality of the work we do, we are gone. What we should then do is to appreciate the fact that the work of the APRM on one side must have scientific rigor, but that scientific rigor must be balanced with meaningful participation of the people. That scientific rigor can even translate into evidence-based processes, but those evidence-based processes on the other side must be addressed by people-centered and driven processes. We know that South Africa is no stranger to the culture of self-assessment. We went through the first generation review. We institutionalized through the Department of Public, the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation. We began to institutionalize monitoring and evaluation. We come through the era of the parliamentary high-level panel that was chaired by former President Kgalema Motlanthe. We have multitudes of public participation platforms. And so APRM does not land into a dry soil in South Africa that has no culture of self-assessment. The national structures that we have in South Africa, as Steve has indicated, we have a national focal point. That national focal point is currently Minister Senzo Mchunu of the Department of Public Services and Administration. And we're mentioning this to highlight the importance that for APRM to succeed, it needs political will at the highest level. And that is the political will that we have seen in the national focal point that we have, which political will is not only in word, but in deed as well, through the support that we have received as the leadership and the NGC of the APRM in South Africa. We have an NGC which is on its own a multi-sectoral platform, drawing participation from different sectors of civil society, being youth, women, organizations of the disabled, civics, various issue-based and sectoral organizations constituting, including business, organized labor, and representatives from government, constituting that multi-sectoral NGC. We are in the process of establishing the National Secretariat and the Technical Research Institutions. Our target is that by end of September 2020, we must at least be too close to concluding the establishment phase of all national structures. We're also in the process of developing the national roadmap, which will set the agenda for APRM in South Africa. And some of the activities that will go into implementing that national roadmap will be focused on the thematic focus areas of the APRM, being democracy and political governance, corporate governance, economic governance and management, socio-economic development. But we have added a fifth focus area, which focuses on communications and public participation, because the lessons that we have drawn from the first generation review of the APRM in South Africa is that although work was done, we did not communicate as much as we should have done in terms of mobilizing the rest of society behind the work of the APRM. And so we decided that we are going to have a dedicated focus on that. And this national roadmap will be implemented through various activities, like we're going to go big on research, which research will be driven through the technical research institutions. We will be issuing a call for those who have appetite of working with us to submit their expression of interest and then collaborate with us on that research. We will have a mix of research activities, which will be according to the 4 thematic areas, but also will have those that will be cross-cutting. We will be having thematic roundtables. We will be having platforms of open submissions any day, anytime, where any sector of society, where any individual feels that they have an issue to raise with the APRM, we are going to provide platforms where those open submissions will be made. We are going to make sure that we drive platforms of social dialogue as meaningful participation platforms. We are going to go on the ground, guided as well by the risk factors of COVID-19. We are going to go on the ground into community-based engagements. And we are going to open ourselves up, colleagues, to make sure that everyone and anyone who has a view to raise is given a platform to raise those. And lastly, we do want to encourage that activities that will be done by individuals in this platform and anywhere else, activities that will be done in the form of any organized formations in this platform or anywhere else, you must not shy away from engaging the leadership of the NGC, of the APRM in South Africa at the highest level, because we have already acknowledged that stakeholder engagements will be one of the biggest fields of work in which we must focus on if we are to succeed in our work. As we will be doing this work with a bigger focus on the youth sector, we do want to encourage as well that this platform and all others must also engage those sectors of interest that are already represented in the NGC of the APRM, so that the work that is done in this and other platforms already finds traction with those sectors that are in the NGC and the NGC as a whole. Ours is to provide space and opportunities for views to find expression. And that is the commitment we are going to live by. Colleagues, thank you so much. And we wish that the deliberations we'll have here will also be shared with us so that they go and sharpen the work of NGC in South Africa. Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much, Thulani. I think the APRM is in great hands under your stewardship and leadership. Thank you for a very comprehensive input. We have a question here, quickly before we move on to Dr. Sakela, from Bilile Faith Shange, to the chair, Thulani Tshefuta. What does good governance mean to a country like South Africa, which is full of corruption, poverty and inequality, among other issues? And secondly, which I think you have answered, how does APRM promote inclusiveness and people or public participation? So I think if you can make a quick answer to that, and then we'll move on to Dr. Sakela briefly.
I think I've reflected on the second part of the question. Let me just attempt the first part of the question. We operate from the premise that South Africa has one of the best constitutions. South Africa has one of the best legislations, strategies, policies, and all of those. We find disjuncture in implementation. What we may have done in the paradigm of good governance is that as the people, we may have put all our trust on government, that government will do the right things. And in that process, we withheld our power as the people to say, where there is anything going wrong, we are not going to wait for government to come to us an account. We are going to yield and use our power to hold government accountable. And so what should then happen on the issue of accountability is that it is us who must demand accountability. It is us who must seize all the levers of public participation and hold those who are in power accountable. It is us who get deprived of opportunities for socio-economic development through corruption. What corruption does is that instead of availing resources for the benefit of the people for which those resources are targeted for, corruption benefits the individuals. And so we will be the ones who get compromised until we raise our hand and be counted as part of the solution in the fight against corruption actively. It will be us who must stand and be counted as part of the solution in holding government and institutions of government accountable in every step of the actions that should be taken in the name of good governance. Good governance will never be achieved until the people know and appreciate the power that they hold in holding those that are in positions of responsibility accountable.
Thank you very much, Thulani. And last question from me. I think I heard it in your presentation, but would the NGC therefore welcome a well-argued and comprehensive report from the youth sector?
Most definitely. The answer is a resounding yes in that opportunity.
Great, thank you.
What do sectoral inputs do, by the way, is to challenge the NGC and the entirety of society to view the issues, let's say, of economic governance and management through the lens of young people. And so all other sectoral inputs will be doing precisely that, and we open ourselves to that. We will not be basically accepting inputs or submissions in the corners such that we can water them down. The NGC in its mainstream platforms will provide for opportunity for those organized inputs to be presented and argued.
Great, thank you. There are a couple of other questions, but we're going to get to that a little bit later. We haven't forgotten you. I'd now like to turn to Dr. Patrick Sochela from the APRM division within the DPSA, the Department of Public Service and Administration, to make some very brief remarks. Patrick, just unmute yourself.
Good
Go
morning,
ahead.
Chair. How are you?
Good, thank you. Go ahead, sir.
Can you hear me, Steve?
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity, and would like to confirm what the chair has just indicated regarding what we intend to do regarding the process. And going forward, obviously it's in our interest that we open up the process, because by its very nature, the process is meant to be inclusive. And we obviously welcome the participation of a sector like the youth in particular. And so that's basically the commitment that the chairperson has just, made, and I concur with that. And I'd like to make a comment on good governance. Good governance basically means that you comply with the rule of law, but because if you comply with the rule of law, it means that you govern in such a way that you follow certain rules that are prescribed in terms of our constitutional democracy. In that manner, you cannot have issues like corruption, which is prevalent in our case. So basically it means governing according to prescribed principles that are in line with our constitutional values. So that is the point that I would like to make at this stage. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sukela. And it's great to have the support and the participation of the DPSA. We really value it. Thank you very much, and also for facilitating my being able to speak last week in the APRM meeting. I thank you very much for that. Now, Luanda, is it we're turning to Lennon? Is that correct?
And no, Steve, we will be launching off to our interactive session now, starting with our poll and then allowing participants to raise their hands and speaking should they wish, or they can pose their questions on the Q&A and allow the participants the panelists to respond. Thanks, Steve.
Okay, thanks. And just on the timing, how long do we have for this bit?
We have about 20 minutes for the interactive session.
Okay, great. So now it's your opportunity to ask and answer questions. Please raise your hand if you would like to ask them directly, and then we can promote you to a panelist, and you can put on your video and or audio. So there are a couple of questions in the Q&A box or in the chat box so far. Lesedi, would you like to raise your question? If so, please put up your hand. There should be a raise hand icon. I'm looking for hands. I don't see hands here. Okay, well, in the meantime, I'll just raise the question for...
We have a raised hand from Lesedi Letibele. I'm allowing her to...
Perfect, thanks.
Yeah.
Luan, I'm gonna hand over to you for this session, if you don't mind.
Sure, Steve. So
okay.
I've allowed Lesedi Letibele to make their intervention. So the floor is yours, Lesedi.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity. I'd like to ask that, because I heard the national governing speaker, who's the gentleman who just spoke, speaking of creating platforms for the youth to be able to do research, collaborate with the APRM. So I just wanted to know the process of everything, how those who are interested will be able to register themselves, or should they wait for maybe to be told, or there's going to be an advertisement of some sort, or there will be a direct communication. So I just wanted to know how will one be able to contact the National Governing Council to be able to work with them in future.
Thank you, Lesedi. We have another question from Nokolo Kwala on the chat function, directed to our chairperson, Dr. Thulani, Tshefuta. Thulani, what would you say are the most notable successes emanating from progress reports of the recommendations made from South Africa's first peer review? I would encourage participants at this time to raise their hands if they'd like the floor, or to post their questions on the chat to Q&A. But seeing as we do not have any further questions, I will allow Thulani, the chairperson, to respond to those two questions posed by Lesedi and Nokolo. Thulani, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And thanks for the relevant questions that have been raised. The first one, in terms of the APRM collaborations, is that we, even just from myself as the chair, I believe in the capacities of young people who can basically add a significant amount of contribution in the work of the APRM in South Africa. So experience is not going to be used as an impediment for people to join and make a contribution in the work of the APRM. What we have always argued for is that experience can always be juxtaposed with potential in terms of giving people opportunities to do their work. What we have even done is that my first meeting earlier this morning was actually about checking 1 or 2 sitters that can even give us an opportunity for internships of new young graduates who can join and support the work of the APRM from internally. And in terms of the research collaborations, we will anchor our research work around the technical research institutions. For those technical research institutions, we are going to issue a call for expressions of interest for those institutions that are interested to collaborate with us in that regard to do that. It is a call that will go out very soon. And what we can do is that when we do that, I mean, we can use all platforms that are existing, including sharing it with the South African Institute for International Affairs, so that they also circulate in their own networks. And the last question from Nokolo about notable successes and weaknesses is that there are many of those which have been coming off time from the previous reports. If you take, for example, Steve can bear testimony to this. In our induction session on Friday, we were told that in the first generation review, there were instances where the work of the APRM was not communicated. And what we have done this time around is to already integrate that lesson into our work now by having a dedicated work stream that will focus on communication and public awareness. The previous review sessions have always lambasted the long-term planning in South Africa. And now we know that we have the NDP. There has always been issues about internal instruments for monitoring and evaluating the work of government, which has actually led to poor implementation. And now we know that we have those instruments and platforms of monitoring and evaluation. So what we have done in terms of our work now is not only to focus on the successes, but also focus on the weaknesses, so that you take those successes and build on them on the current plans. Take those weaknesses, plan for them and integrate them in the plan so that you respond to them in advance. And so that is the attitude that we have adopted in terms of the lessons from the first generation review and anywhere else in the continent where there are lessons that we can draw and integrate in our work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairperson. I think you have also started to respond to the question that was posed by Ms. Susan Mwape about how to do things differently during this process, given the lessons learned from the first process. I will move on to another question that has been posted on the chat by Mr. Kenneth Diole, who says, hi everyone, if we are in agreement that from a South African perspective, we do not lack the necessary policies and strategies to the various issues raised, is there a plan to partner with the state to ensure effective implementation of these policies? In addition, will there be a relationship between the APRM and the Monitoring and Evaluation Department in the Presidency to ensure concurrent M&E processes to evaluate the work done in the interest of young people? May I please humbly ask Dr. Patrick Sokela to address that one from a DPSA perspective, and the chairperson to chime in if he has any additional responses to that. Dr. Patrick, if you may please just indulge us with this question.
Thank you very much for the question. I appreciate the Minister for DPM is part of the NGC. So there's coordination there because the NGC has got civil society as well as ministers that are representing government. So in that sense, there is coordination between what is happening in the APRM and what is happening in the DPME by virtue of their minister being part of the NGC. And in terms of the question of participation regarding the policies, obviously there's going to be a linkage because whatever comes out of the APRM has got to influence policy making in South Africa. So the representation of ministers in the NGC is meant to ensure that there are those linkages in terms of this process being able to inform government policy going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sokela. We have another question on the chat that is asking if the APRM South Africa will have a website. If so, when can we expect one? Dr. Sokela.
Sorry, I'm in the office. There was a bit of interruption in terms of the noise. If you may just repeat that question.
Yes, Dr. Sokela, the question that has been posed on the chat is asking regarding an APRM SA website. Will we be having one? And if so, when can we expect it? How will communications from the DPSA be channeled?
Okay. The reason why I'm here is that I can, present myself to yourselves so that you can see me. And Steve is providing that platform so that we can interact. We are currently establishing the web page right now, and that web page would be communicated in terms of the communication of the web page is going to be on the DPSA web page. We are working on a portal that is going to host all the APRM related activities and announcement. So that is the process that is currently taking place right now. But from a practical point of view, I'm here and you can contact me and I would be in a position to advise as the process proceeds in terms of what is the way forward with regard to the APRM process. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sokela. And just a final question that has been posed by Mr. Kenneth Diole. I'd like to request for Mr. Kenneth Diole to please just make his interventions. I've allowed him to talk. Please unmute and direct your intervention or question rather to the chairperson as you have requested. Kenneth, the floor is yours.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Luanda. Yeah, my question, I think, just as a follow-up from the initial one, is really around, particularly to you, Mr. Thulani, around the role that the APRM is going to play, in particular to, as you acknowledged, that the strategies and the policies are in place, but the implementation is where there is a lack. And I think if we're in agreement with that, I'm just wondering, is the APRM going to be doing a particular interventions around, is there potential partnerships with the state to ensure that we can ensure effective implementation? Or are we still going to be largely dependent on civil society almost holding the state accountable in that role, rather than almost proactively trying to partner up in that process so that we can ensure implementation, but equally do sufficient M&E while doing or while implementing those particular policies, especially as and how they relate to young people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kenneth. And Dr. Thulani, please, you may respond to that question.
Thank you so much to Kenneth for that question. The sequence of activities is such that we will do the country review. It will get presented in the highest of levels in the AU, and then inputs being made. And then once we have that report with all those inputs, ours is to integrate those peer-reviewed inputs into the National Program of Action and the plans of South Africa. Now, what matters the most is that as structures of civil society, we must not give it all to government and say we have made our inputs, we now leave it in the hands of government to do the implementation. Out of all those activities, we must be able to define a role for every sector of society. Believe me, there are programs, even if you give it to government to implement with all the resources that government may have, those programs will be suffocated from the beginning if implemented by government, because in their very own nature, they should be allowed the free will of being implemented and led by the civil society. Let me just make one practical example. I personally do not believe that if you take in the youth sector, the program of the National Youth Service must be implemented and led by government. It must be given and supported to civil society to be implemented and led at that level. And so ours must not only be to come up with ideas, give them over for government to implement, and then we do M&E and then we come back and complain later, this has been done, this has not been done. We must raise our hand to be counted as part of the solution, in as far as saying, what are those things that we will also take charge of implementing? And so those implementation partnerships and collaborations should be part of the equation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Chairperson. Just racing against time, I'd like to propose that we move on to our polling, and I will hand back to Stephen now to take us through that. I will share my screen so participants are able to see the poll. Steve, please, can you then guide us through this section?
Sorry, can you hear me now? We're going to be using doing a little poll, not scientific, but just to get the impression of everybody here. So what you need to do is take out your cell phone and go to the address www.menti.com, and then it'll ask you for a code, and the code there is 5984307. And then it's going to ask you for 3 key governance issues. So if you think it is the shortage of lollipops or lack of service delivery or whatever the issue may be, you type them in the 1, 2, 3, and then it's going to form a little, well, you'll see, it's going to form a word cloud. So take out your cell phone and go to menti.com. So I'm going to do it myself, menti.com. Then it asks you for the code, and the code there is 5984307, submit. And then it comes and it asks you a question. What are the 3 pressing governance issues in South Africa? So I'm going to start typing, 1 per line. Once you've typed those, you type submit, and there you can see it starts to form a word cloud. The more often the word is used, the bigger and more central it is. So as people, so we've had 9 responses so far. You can see there in the bottom right corner. So we are seeing similar issues coming up. We'll just give everybody a chance to put the things in. Obviously, some things are similar. So I see already GBV, gender-based violence, gender equality. So those would have to be grouped. But there are 3 that are very, very prominent. So we've had 13 responses. We'll keep it open for a couple of more seconds. Okay, 16 responses. Okay, 17. If you're a presenter, you also are welcome to make your mark.
Just to emphasize that these are anonymous.
Right. And it's not scientific, it's just taking the pulse of the people there, and we won't be held to these as you know, the issues that we would look at, but it just gives a very nice idea of what's on your mind and what you think is important. Okay, we'll give it another 30 seconds. Okay, I mean, if you look at it, the three clear winners, unemployment, corruption at the center, and inequality. You could add to those perhaps accountability, so that would make them a little bit bigger. Then there's a lot about gender-based violence, GBV, gender-based violence, spelt a slightly different way, and gender equality. Quite a bit on service delivery, inequality in service delivery, poor policy implementation, and then some ones with less but no less importance: drug addiction, youth inclusion, poor school system, apathy, innovation, accountability, climate change, etc. So yeah, that's just a little exercise. I'm going to take a photo of the final thing, and then we can move on, unless anybody has questions or comments about it. We're probably at the end of our discussion time, right, Lou?
Correct, Steve. We need to move on to the second.
Okay. Okay. And just sorry, remind me, I don't have the schedule in front of me. Is it the countries first and then Lennon?
Yes, Steve. We are moving on now to Mr. Graham Hopwood to share experiences from Namibia.
Okay, Graham, go ahead. Is Graham with us?
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me?
Hi, Graham. Yes, we can. I can hear you.
So you can hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. I was just, I came in a little bit late and I realized when I was listening that maybe my talk shouldn't be so much lessons from Namibia as maybe what Namibia could learn from South Africa's experience, because obviously you're quite a bit further down the road with the APRM process than Namibia is. First of all, just to briefly introduce myself, my name is Graham Hopwood. I head a think tank called the Institute for Public Policy Research. And when Namibia joined the APRM process in January 2017, we started working with Steve and Luanda and the people at SIA on how we could contribute to the process as civil society organizations. Hopefully also make it a more accountable process, and in some ways to speed up the process, because we were worried about long time delays and time lags. So we started off in 2018 actually with doing a shadow civil society report, which looked at the issues that CSOs in Namibia wanted to see the APRM process address. And we thought that was a good sort of starting point to get the right issues being discussed. And this was really prior to any movement in government in a significant way to set up the APRM process. So we were a little bit ahead of the game, but the government seemed to appreciate the fact that at least civil society was to some extent getting organized on this, because they realized that they cannot do the APRM process without involving civil society at the heart of it. So when eventually last year the National Governing Council at the end of last year was set up in Namibia, there was at least some material and a report from civil society for them to look at. And since then, what's happened in Namibia is the Governing Council was set up, and they've set to work, and they have actually already issued a tender to continue with putting together the country report, starting with the country questionnaire. So that's where we are in a nutshell in Namibia. So quite a bit behind, I think, where South Africa is. Obviously, we joined quite a bit later. I think there are probably some points of comparison with South Africa, but I think so one of the differences probably is that our civil society isn't particularly well organized, particularly in the sense of overall umbrella body or coordinating body for civil society. In a way, that's why my own organization, the Institute for Public Policy Research, stepped in to help, because there wasn't any other leading civil society organization at that point that was able to bring together at least some of the leading NGOs and CSOs in the country. There are sort of historical reasons for that, and also funding reasons. We are considered an upper middle income country by the World Bank. I think South Africa has the same classification, but certainly for civil society here, it's cut off huge amounts of possible support from traditional donors who supported the anti-apartheid struggle, who are either not interested in Namibia, but are interested, but just don't have the options because of their policies and where their donor aid goes to give support. That's a very quick sense of the fact that the civil society situation in Namibia is relatively weak, and therefore it's quite a challenge to make sure that we can contribute to a process like the APRM, which is multi-leveled and relatively complex, and demands civil society engagement at various points and in various ways along the way. And I think that's where we do need to learn from what other countries have been through. But I think one of the problems that you had historically in South Africa, which we also faced, was quite a lot of unhappiness with the original appointments to the National Governing Council. Our Governing Council is about 15 persons strong, probably a good size in the sense that it's not too large and unwieldy. But when it was appointed by the President at the end of last year, there were really only possibly 2 of those 15 who could be said really to have strong links with civil society. And we wanted to see what is outlined in quite a bit of the APRM literature, which is a combination of official and government involvement with civil society, and also with private sector involvement, particularly because of the emphasis on corporate governance. A number of NGOs, more than 20 of the leading NGOs and CSOs, did write to the President. It wasn't a very satisfactory process, but we did write and complain, say you need to have a more balanced National Governing Council. And in the first couple of months of this year, they did adapt the Governing Council by adding 2 or 3 more people. So it's certainly not ideal, but it's better than it was. So we now find ourselves at this stage where I think the rest of civil society is now slightly disengaged from the process, and there's a few people representing civil society on the National Governing Council, but we're not really clear if they are going to report back. They haven't done so far, on what the NGC is doing, what it's up to, how the process is going, and to give feedback to the rest of civil society, and to remain engaged with all those groups who initially were involved from 2018. And we get the impression actually that now, although we wanted them to act quickly for so long and to get moving on this issue, they may be moving too fast, in the sense that they've made clear that they want Namibia's questionnaire and the country report to essentially be compiled by the end of the year by whichever agency, and I think it will be the University of Namibia, which takes on that task as a technical research organization assisting the process. So now we're a bit concerned that having got the process going, there won't be enough consultation. It'll be done too quickly, and it starts to become a bit more of a kind of tick box exercise, something we wanted to avoid, because we think the APRM process can genuinely lead to improvements in governance across a whole range of issues and sectors. And therefore, this whole situation, of course, hasn't been helped by the pandemic. So, the idea that they could do a countrywide consultation survey and complete the country report in a matter of 3 or 4 months, in view of also the restrictions that COVID places on public meetings, although they are being eased in Namibia as they are in South Africa, just doesn't seem practical or possible, really, in view of an effective APRM process at the end of the day. So I think we're a bit concerned here, and I think civil society finds itself in quite a lot of contradictions around the APRM process. How far do we get involved and become part of the system, if you like? And how far do we stay, to some extent, removed and on the outside, but then more in a better position to be able to criticize and to hold to account? And I think that's something that we're probably going to have to face up to in the next sort of 6 to 8 months, really, as we grapple with how the National Governing Council is handling the composition of the country report. So I just think civil society, of course, can sometimes be politicized, be overcritical, particularly when it comes to government, just as government can sometimes just want to incorporate civil society in a way that actually doesn't respect their independence. So I think that's where we stand at the moment, and it would be interesting to hear, of the tensions and the way the tensions might have been resolved, overcome, if you've had any of these issues in South Africa, because I think at the end of the day, the people who are running this for government in Namibia do realize that civil society has to be involved. But you also get in government a tendency just, okay, we must just finish this. There's a timeline, the money has to be spent, we have to do it. And not necessarily do it in the most effective way or in a way that really consults broadly and brings in a whole range of views. So I think I'll end off there. I hope you've got a sense of what's happening in Namibia from what I said, and whether there are any lessons to be learned either way between South Africa and Namibia. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Graham. I've posted in the chat a link to a document that Graham and I put together quite soon after we had finished our work in Namibia, which doesn't contain the kind of politics of now wanting to rush the review. But in terms of some initial lessons, I think we did 10 lessons. You'll see it there in the chat. Thank you, Graham, and thanks for joining us and for some great insights. I'm now going to turn to Susan Mwape in Zambia. I've known Susan for a long time, probably nearly 20 years now. And Susan is an activist. She founded her own civil society organization called Common Cause Zambia and has been really engaged with the Zambian and continental APRM process for many, many years and has a wealth of experience. So Sue, over to you.
Thank you very much, Steve. Good afternoon. It's still morning. Good morning, everyone. I would like to just share a little bit about the APRM process in Zambia and how we participated as civil society. Zambia acceded to the APRM in January 2006, and we only launched the process in 2007. The national sensitization process began in 2009, and then we had our country review mission only come into the country in 2011. So the process took a very long time. I'm just giving you these dates to give you some context in terms of how long it took us before our whole process got to where we are now. And so that was the first comprehensive review that we had. And then in April last year, we had a targeted review mission that was focusing on mineral resources and tourism. So in 2007, when we first acceded to the process in 2006, in 2007, the APRM was very new. Most civil society organizations knew very little about the APRM. And through SAIA, the CSOs came together for an orientation on the APRM. And it was at that meeting that the civil society organizations that attended that meeting felt it was important to come together and observe the process and participate, because after all, the APRM has CSO as a criteria within the participation framework. So, so from there, we created a loose alliance, which happened right after the workshop. And that loose alliance was more or less just writing to the government to find out what was going on, trying to push and see where we were. And the process was extremely low. Like I said, we acceded in 2006 and we only received the country review mission in 2011. So at a point in 2007, it was felt that the process was too slow. There wasn't much happening. But then again, civil society organizations were already preoccupied with their work plans and things that they had planned. The APRM had sort of come in the middle of it. So it was decided that we create a civil society secretariat dedicated towards observing the APRM process. And so we created a secretariat that was funded by GIZ and recruited staff in that secretariat. I worked in that secretariat. There was a coordinator and an assistant coordinator. And we then acted as a liaison between civil society and the government in following the process. So through that, we did a lot of work and participated at all levels of the APRM, starting from the national sensitization process, the preparatory missions that happened, when it was time to, when we felt that they were taking too long to appoint a national governing council, the civil society secretariat sat together and suggested organizations to the Ministry of Justice, who were the focal point on which organizations or individuals they could consider, because it had already been agreed that the NGC composition should be tripartite, meaning equal numbers of civil society, of government, and of the private sector. So we gave them a list, and a number of those people were selected and included onto the NGC. I mean, to a point where the chairperson and the vice chairperson of the NGC came from civil society, on the NGC came from civil society. So we conducted a lot of advocacy, sensitization, and we also went as far as preparing a CSO submission with technical support from SIA, of course. And in this submission, we came together as civil society and looked at our areas of expertise. Those areas of expertise are what determined the topics that we picked for our civil society submission. And so through that submission is what we gave to the country review mission when they came to the country. We also participated in the validation process of the country self-assessment report and also of the country review missions report. We also participated in the country review mission itself, more like a parallel process. We went to all the 9 provinces where they went and participated and observed the way they were doing their work. We actually got some feedback from the lead panelist at the time, who was Professor Amos Sawyer, who thanked us for the input that we had made. And we noticed also that most of the issues all the issues that were raised in our CSO submission were reflected in the country review mission and also in the national report later on. We did a lot of work around raising awareness on the process because it was up to a slow start. So we built a lot of momentum. We did a lot of publicity materials. We used to run a newsletter that used to run quarterly. We had a quarterly newsletter dedicated to the APRM. We did radio programs, community radio, television programs, and also outreach activities. We ensured that all the organizations that were part of the secretariat, if they had activities, they had to include the APRM on their programming. And so that was part of the training that went around in the whole country. So when the country review mission came to Zambia, they found that wherever they went, there were still civil society organizations that were able to engage with them because they were always aware of the process through the work of the organizations that used to go to those provinces to train them on APRM and other issues. And then we also did a lot of work. We also shared our lessons, our experiences as a network with other countries like Tanzania, Mauritius, Mozambique, Botswana, Namibia, through organizations like SIA and ISA, who used to do a lot of work around APRM at the time. Our advocacy was mostly around the delayed processes. the APRM came at a very critical time in Zambia when we're trying to review our constitution, and we had an acrimonious relationship between civil society and government at the time because of the mode that they were using to do the constitutional review. So when the APRM came, it still sat in the same Ministry of Justice that was running the other process. So it took a lot of collaboration, efforts, and trying to get to a place where we could see eye to eye and discuss these governance issues, because the constitution itself was a big governance issue and was also a big issue in the APRM report. So there was a lot of mistrust and just bad blood between us. But that did not deter us. We continued to do our work, and we also learned along the way that, you know, sometimes it takes pressure to make diamonds. So there were times when we had to put in a lot of pressure, and there were times when we had to just sit and try to do a round table and dialogue and talk and move. And some of the lessons that we learned were that, for example, having civil society representatives sitting on the NGC did not necessarily mean that those representatives necessarily represented our interests. It was hard sometimes to get information from the NGC on what was going on, even through our representatives who were selected by organization. So you would have somebody, I'll give an example of SAYA. So if we had a representative from SAYA who is a CSO representative nominated as a SAYA rep, they didn't come back to give information to SAYA or to the secretariat, simply because they signed the confidentiality clause, and sometimes relations were also bad with those kinds of people. So it was a challenge sometimes. So those are some of the things that you always have to be prepared for. And then coming forward, in our engagement with the targeted review mission that took place last year, we were looking at two key areas, mineral resources and tourism. And we noticed that the participation in the targeted review was kind of reduced. It was not as vibrant. It was not as energetic as the first review. I guess there were a lot of things that may have contributed to that. The fact that, first of all, the two topics are not so much topics that so many organizations work in, but also I think there was also some sort of fatigue in the process. With the way the whole first process took, we needed to do a lot more work as civil society to get more interest and to also raise a lot more awareness around the APRM process. The CSOs themselves were not so engaged and interested in the APRM, probably because of also competing interests. So those are some of the lessons that I can share from Zambia. I want to believe my time is up, or can I go on?
No, I think if that's a natural place to end, maybe you can add some stuff in the questions. Thank you very much, Susan. And as you can see, colleagues, it's a long haul. Susan's been involved in this for definitely over a decade, if not longer. So, and you've heard from both Graham and Susan is that there may come times when civil society needs to push a little bit, needs to nudge government, needs to express its dissatisfaction, and it's all part of the process of policy making in a democracy. I'm now going to turn to my Pelo Pahle, excuse me for the pronunciation, in Botswana, who has been our main partner working with the Botswana Council of NGOs. So my Pelo, over to you.
Thank you, Steve. I greet you all. Yes, my name is Maipelo Pahle. I'm the programs coordinator for Bukongo. I'll just be taking you through how the APRM process unfolded, especially during the lockdown, because the time when we started implementing, it was lockdown here in Botswana. So Botswana ascended to the APRM really late. It was the 38th country to ascend to the APRM process. And that was around February 2019. And we had 5 activities to unfold our implementation process, which were pre-planning meetings, training, workshops, and then we had to divert from our initial plans of meeting physically to virtual online delivery, which now we started to have the first, our first working group was online. Thereafter, having had 4 or 5, if I'm not mistaken. And then we are anticipating to be having our online validation workshop sometime in October. So our first online webinar was very fantastic. It was graced by permanent secretaries from the Office of the President, that is people from government, and as part of the team organization all over the Botswana
Not hearing you a little bit. Maybe you can adjust how you are talking.
A final submission on some of the issues where citizen participation, inclusion, electrical systems, and just to mention a few. But before this, we had to do a survey whereby to put together all these issues in themes so that we don't come up with a very bulky submission at the end of the day. So we managed to arrive at 12, and right now submissions have been coming in. The little articles that civil society organizations were putting together to make our final submissions have been been submitted. 1 or 2 are still pending, but we are pushing for them to be all submitted by the time we have our validation workshop. And our background paper also as an overview of all these, in a synopsis of all these issues, is also been finalized. And SAIA has engaged a consultant to put all this together so that by the time the validation workshop comes, we can review and okay it. So as Bokongo, as a council for non-governmental organization, we saw that it was very pertinent for us to partner with SAIA to come up with, to sensitize actually a civil society organization here in Botswana, because we were at the peak of Botswana having to review its constitution. So it came at a very right time, that because the constitution, like Susan was saying, it's part of the governance issue that we needed to understand even further. So it was also for us as the council to produce, as the council to be at the forefront by bringing in together civil society as a collective so that they can produce a comprehensive governance assessment of Botswana's strengths and weaknesses, of where Botswana is. Is it doing very well in terms of governance issues? Where can it improve? And then it was also to develop recommendations or remedies actually that might influence good policies of, like I was saying, where we are we doing okay? Are we, do we have to improve on some things? And also to just open civic space for civil society and citizens, because by its nature, it will promote dialogue, because you will have to consult, to ask people what are the pertinent issues that you would think that needs to be addressed or that needs to be looked at. And then to create awareness among Botswana civil society on what needs to be done for the APRM process to be effective and inclusive. Because like I was saying, it is a new mechanism for us to use here. So we are also still learning, and we are very grateful for SAIA and to be having held us the good directions of even involving the Namibia and Zambia lessons, that we really try to see what are the lessons that we can take, so that we can also try to improve on what they have learned as countries in Southern Africa. And also it's a good platform also for even Botswana as a country to showcase its best practices to its peers, whether it is it well run, is it inclusive, how transparent is the process, and also even on issues of accountability in the country, because I mean an accountable country where it's open, it's transparent, and then all the processes are out there for everyone to observe and see, it can even potentially attract investors that would assist in the country's development, whereby maybe even civil society can even tap on, because one of the main issues for civil society's challenges are issues of finances. So yeah, I mean, as much as it has been a very fantastic journey where we've been able to speed up the implementation, where people have been hands-on, and I wouldn't say that the lockdown really has impacted negatively on the process, but in the contrary, it has maybe helped in a way to speed up, because people were home, they were concentrating on it, or maybe by not having to have reached out places that we could have wanted. But in all our virtual meetings, we have tried to bring in representatives from all our regional coordinators, because the Congo has a representation in all the regional corners of Botswana. And then during our virtual meetings, we have tried to bring all of them on board to be part of the virtual meetings that we have been having with SAIA. So yeah, the challenges that are very minimal. It's just that, like I was saying, the COVID pandemic, that our traveling schedule was affected. But the mitigation was that we brought everybody on board, that we felt that they could benefit from this process. And then because I was saying that we have been writing articles to put up our final submission. So there were instances whereby the article writers or civil society organizations that were at the forefront of putting together these issues were querying about having to get research materials to compile articles from institutions, because it was a bit of a mission, because during our implementation, there was a total lockdown here in Botswana. So it meant that all those institutions that maybe we needed to get information from, that were closed. But as soon as they opened up, the civil society organizations that were writing up on those articles, they tried to liaise with them. So lessons and advice that I could give to youth organizations in South Africa that have to embark on a similar journey of the APRM is that the APRM tool is a very interesting tool that needs people to be hands-on. Is that a civil society organization in this process, they really helped here in Botswana as it speeded the implementation process, that all civil society felt that as a collective, when they come together and work in unison, not in silos, it is going to bring positive impacts, as it will voice civil society's voice to the government to address issues of concern that they could have addressed or that they could have raised. And then having a council of a civil society organization is very crucial, because as the council, we're pushing, encouraging, and motivating civil society to fulfill their mandate of also putting together those articles and also giving them resource material where need be to be able to facilitate them to come up with those referenced, factored, and more solid papers, so that when you read, you actually get the feel and understand what are the issues on the ground. And then the other lesson that we learned in this journey is that government is willing to listen here in Botswana, but as civil society, we have to know and master how to engage them. And also as civil society, because we are most often put in a place where maybe it brings about contradictory statements, that we are only talking negative about the government. But I mean, maybe this is the time that we as civil society organization, we should also not only see the things that are negative in government, but also to come up with workable recommendation to share with government in improving policies and strategic frameworks. Like I was saying that we are at the peak of trying to review the constitution of Botswana. So this is where civil society will be needed to try and shape up those strategic frameworks of exactly where those amendments are they needed. And then as a word of advice to youth organization in South Africa is that they should stay true to themselves and know that tomorrow is not guaranteed, that the work that they have, they should do it. And then the APRM process is not an easy process. It needs a lot of commitment and dedication to yield positive results and have impact that are desired. But the secret is that you have to fully work together and to do your stakeholder analysis so that all the people that are to be engaged are all represented, so that it is positive impacts. And because we need, there's a process whereby each and every person needs to put their hands together to make it work. Thank you.
Thank you, Maipelo. That was great. Just a couple of things on the Botswana process. Yes, it was a big experiment for us to move from what was going to be a face-to-face and entail a lot of travel for me to Botswana to move to online was a learning curve. I think one positive about online is that you can bring in people from all around the country and it doesn't cost very much. But we also learned a lesson, for example, that we may need to offer data for people's computers because not everybody can afford that. So we've managed to factor that into our budget, but also to say thank you to Botswana for the commitment to the process. My general comment, which Maipelo has seen on email a lot, is that the submissions that we got from the individual groups were good at articulating the problems and had great recommendations. But for me, the missing part was providing evidence, providing supporting statistics and research to back up the very strong arguments. Okay, so we have one more speaker, and that is Mr. Lennon Monyai from the APRM Secretariat. Lennon is a young man. He's a graduate from Wits University in Johannesburg and has been at the APRM, I think, for about 3 years or so, and is very much engaged in youth issues. So Lennon, over to you. Just unmute yourself, and if you want, you can put your camera on.
Thank you so much, Stephen. I have a PowerPoint presentation. I don't know if you can see it.
Yes.
Thank you. So before I make my presentation, let me just recognize the new NGC chairperson, Mr. Thulani Tshefuta, the NGC chairperson. Dr. Patrick Sokela, the DP from DPSA, Ms. Susan Wape from Common Cause Zambia, colleagues from Botswana, Namibia, and of course, my friends from SIA, as well as the SIDA ambassador from Addis Ababa. Thank you so much for being with us. My name is Lennon Munyai, and I'm a youth focal point at the APRM Secretariat. I was also double as a researcher. I joined the APRM about 3 years ago when the APRM got revitalized. I'm going to give you a synopsis of the APRM youth agenda, sort of take you back to when we started, what we've achieved so far, and some of things that we would like to achieve going forward. I should just note before I start my presentation that I'm very pleased that South African NGCs shown to be very proactive and it's very youthful. I think it's a big win for the APRM youth agenda. So as far as the youth mandate is concerned, when it comes to the APRM, we derive our mandate from the African Youth Charter, as well as an assembly decision by African Union heads of states in 2011 that requested the APRM to incorporate the monitoring and implementation of the Youth Charter, as well as for the basis of evaluation, in this case, country review reports. We also get our mandate from the expanded mandate, which was given to the APRM in 2017, when it received a mandate to track the implementation and oversee the monitoring and evaluation of key governance areas on the continent. Within the APRM circles, it's commonly known as the APRM expanded mandate. So we started the youth agenda at the APRM in 2017, largely with the support of SIRE, the youth program at SIRE, as well as our colleagues Stephen and Luanda, who gave us a lot of space in terms of engaging young people. Civil society organizations in South Africa also got involved. There was also a group in Kenya. They're known as the APRM Youth Network in Kenya that also were very involved. They lobbied and they advocated for the APRM to actually host a youth gathering to kickstart youth programs. So we held the first APRM youth program in N'Djamena, Chad in 2019. And I should say that all of this was also supported by the AU declaring the year 2017 as Year of Youth, with the theme harnessing the demographic dividend through investments in youth. So since then, there's been recognition of youth within the APRM processes, particularly with a lot of work being done by the APRM Secretariat in hosting programs, activities online, webinars, and so forth. But I'm just going to take you back to the first APRM Youth Symposium that was held in N'Djamena, Chad. We had about 100 youth participants, a huge group from South Africa, because South African youth had been very active in the year 2017 and 2018. From this photo, you can see Madam Luanda was presenting there. We had President Idris Deby, as well as the APRM CEO. The outcome documented, the main outcome that came out of the meeting was a request by African young people for the mainstreaming of youth into all APRM processes, and an increase in programs. And there was commitment from the CEO that APRM in all its programs, in its meetings, in its activities, country reviews, they're going to make use of young people, young researchers. And from our side as well, from the Secretariat, which happens to be very youthful, we started increasing youth programs. So since that youth symposium that was held in June 2019, there are a number of key milestones that we've achieved so far. So the first thing is that there is now an APRM youth network that was established, a continental sort of youth network with 8 members. There was an agreement with the AUC Youth Division in terms of sharing of duties and support, in support of the AU Youth Envoy, Ms. Aya Chebi, something that we've started doing. The Secretariat has now prioritized youth in all its meetings. There's a notable increase in participation of youth in APRM high-level meetings. Of course, the Continental Youth Network that I've already explained, it's been given space and supported by the Secretariat. 3 national youth networks are now functional, one in Chad, one in Mali, and one in Kenya. And the big one was the Republic of Namibia conducting a targeted review on youth unemployment in December 2019. And they actually managed to work with some civil society organizations. I remember meeting now Dr. Graham in Namibia. And from that country's view, I realized that young people actually don't know about the APRM. However, they're actually very interested in the process. And there seems to be a disconnect between the participation of young people and the NGC there in Namibia. Young people are not well informed and sensitized about the APRM process. And when we visited the counties in the rural areas, young people actually wanted to participate. They were looking for social media platforms where they can ask questions, where they can interact with government officials. So I think from that, South Africa can take a lesson within the second country review process in terms of engaging young people, particularly those in suburban as well as rural areas. There's been an ongoing process of revision of the APRM questionnaire through the deepening of the review process, which has a separate toolkit that's being developed. I think that's a big win for the youth agenda, because now when countries are getting reviewed, a youth toolkit can be used so that youth issues can come out strongly in country review reports. Then we also started receiving funding from partner organizations, and there's plans to finally have an APRM youth desk. So what would be my recommendations for South African youth that are on this platform and that are looking forward to participate in the second country review process of South Africa? I'll encourage them to contact the South African focal points through the Department of Public Service and Administration, as well as the newly, very youthly APRM NGC to start active youth programs. I've been told that a youth focal point within the National Governing Council has been appointed, Tembi Nkosi, who happens to be a very active young person who also was part of the South African Youth Council. I think his social media accounts are open, and I think in due course the South African focal points and NGC will introduce him to young people that are interested in the APRM process. But I think it's very important for young people to actually be proactive in engaging him and also contacting him. Another very important point that I would like to recommend is to revisit the 2007 review report, as well as the progress reports that South Africa has submitted. This will sort of give an opportunity for young people to actually stock take what has happened so far, the issues that were raised in the previous country review report, and also see where we are going for the second generation country review report. Then I will encourage young people to fully participate in the second generation review process through advocacy and mobilization. And again, I'm going to mention suburban and rural youth, because what has happened so far with my experience working at the APRM Secretariat is that a lot of young people that get involved in the APRM process are young people in city centers, urban areas, who are mostly from universities that are educated, that have sort of get opportunities. So I think if possible, I'll ask that the suburban and rural youth be taken seriously for the second country review. Then when the whole country review is done, maybe by 2021, whenever it's done, I think it's very important for young people to not shelve the report, to sort of follow through after the report has been sort of peer reviewed in terms of the national plan of action, as well as subsequent progress reports. There are certain commitments that the government will make that I think people can follow through. Then lastly, and perhaps the most important point that I want to make today, is that South African young people should actually take advantage of the APRM Secretariat, which is based in Midrand. All for listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lennon. Very interesting, comprehensive presentation, and well done to you for really building this out of nothing, except your passion and commitment. So I think your list of achievements there was impressive. There was one question, just a very quick yes or no, I think you could answer, from Tessa, to ask if this youth kit is already available.
It is not yet available. I think it will be available after a methodology forum, which is supposed to be held early next year. So once it has been validated by member states of the APRM, the toolkit will be available. But when in the process of developing it, I think there will be programs to actually get young people involved and have their inputs.
I'm looking at my watch. Time is not our friend. I'm going to just ask Luanda what her sense is on how we should proceed. The only, we were meant to have another interactive session for questions. I think that would be useful. Maybe beg people's indulgence to go till about 12:15, because also we're going to hear from Tessa to close out the meeting. Is that acceptable, guys? If we maybe just go till latest 12:15, so it'll allow about 10 or 15 minutes for discussion, and then we can wrap up. If you do need to go or you have something else planned, please don't feel bad about leaving. But Luanda, do you think that's acceptable?
Absolutely, Steve. If participants can please indulge us just as we wrap up the final interactive session. But for those that absolutely have to leave, just to note that we are recording this session and it will be sent to all participants. So if you absolutely have to leave, we do understand. But if you can stay for a couple of minutes, I encourage participants to do so. Steve, can we take 15 minutes for interactive session, and also to make an announcement about our WhatsApp group? Thank you.
Okay, cool. So there's a question from Lesedi Letebele, I guess for you, Lennon. What does the youth toolkit comprise of? What does it look like? What makes it up?
So at the moment, the toolkit are youth sort of focus questions that are sort of in line with the 4 thematic areas of APRM. However, going forward, I'm sure there will be revisions to the questionnaire as well. So this is sort of youth, a very comprehensive sort of questionnaire, almost like the APRM questionnaire, but this one is focused, which will be utilized when countries are going through country reviews. However, when they've like serious youth issues, they'll make use of a specific youth toolkit so that youth issues that are in the country can come out strongly.
Thank you. Thanks, Lennon. I'm just going to look through here. You'll also see I posted on the questions a document that we have developed on lessons from Namibia, and then also one on Zambia. Anybody have any? Here, I see there's a new message. Let's go.
Can I please just pose my question, Steve, while you're looking through the questions?
Yes, sure.
My question is posed to our country lessons from Namibia, Botswana, and Zambia. I think, in my experience, the APRM is a highly technical mechanism. The processes are very technical and require engagement over time to fully understand them. In your processes in your country, how did you articulate these processes in a digestible manner? And also, how much were young people involved within your civil society groups? So this question is posed to all the country experiences. So Graham, Maipelo, and Susan. Thank you.
So let's do it in reverse order. Maipelo.
Thank you, Luanda. Yes, like I was saying, what we did was we had training to all our civil society organizations to try to unpack what the APRM really means, so that we have the same understanding before we even started. And we have about, from the 12 pertinent issues, 5 of them are youth-led organizations. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. Susan.
All right, so in Zambia, what we did was, I'll actually start with myself. I got to work in the APRM Secretariat because I met Steve a long time ago, and I was trained on the APRM even before Zambia acceded to the APRM. That was in 2006. through a youth training that was organized, I think, by the Young Women in Action. So I was trained, it was a young people's training, so there were a bunch of youth that were trained from Zambia on the APRM. By the time Zambia was acceding to the APRM, I was already aware of what the APRM was. And then, so that was the starting point. Then going forward, we had a lot of youth engagement in Zambia on the process. I was one of the youngest people that was in the secretariat leading the process. We had a representation on the National Governing Council. So when we gave the list, when we gave a suggestion on the list of civil society reps and
Sorry, can somebody just mute their mic, please? Sorry, Susan, go ahead.
It's all right. So when we were sending in nominations for people that could sit on the NGC, we included youth, and we did have youth representation. We had a gentleman called Guest Nurenda from Operation Young Vote. He was one of the first youth representatives on the Governing Council. And then also at submission level, so even when we did the CSO submission, we ensured that we had representation from representatives of youth organizations. And even when we went into the field, we also ensured that those people that were being trained and oriented on the APRM were also youth representatives. So we did have a lot of very vibrant young people contributing to the process at all levels. Thank you.
Super, thank you. And Graham? Just unmute.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, I can. Just unmute again. Graham, you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry, you can
okay,
hear me now.
There we go, yes.
Yeah, in terms of a youth representation, we had the National Youth Council on our civil society working group. So they were able to feed through information to other youth groups. The National Youth Council is a semi-autonomous government-funded body, but they were quite, at that point, quite cooperative the process. So I think that helped to get through to the youth organizations. So using umbrella bodies that can reach more grassroots organizations is important. And then in terms of trying to get the APRM across to people in an understandable and digestible way, actually when we started work with SAYA, we published an 8-page explainer APRM might apply and work in Namibia, which was written by Steve. And I think that has been very useful. And in fact, it's still the first document we tend to give to people when they want to know about the APRM. So I think that was useful because it was a good overview of the APRM as a whole, but it also applied it to Namibia's context. And that's what people want to try and start to understand. I think the problem at the moment, I think, is there's a little bit of a vacuum. As I said, I think we have this problem that the civil society people on the NGC are not reporting back to, and the NGC itself is not operating in public, so one only picks up bits and pieces of what they are doing. And the whole issue of accountability then comes up, and then the need for civil society outside the NGC to be more proactive is also there as well, so that we, instead of waiting for answers, go and ask them the questions. So maybe that will come back and be more effective once the questionnaire self-assessment and the country review process are underway. Yeah, so that's where we are at the moment.
Okay, just to say, we actually have now country pages on our website for the Namibia process, the Botswana process, and the South Africa process. So if you just had to say, search SAYA APRM Namibia, you'll get to the landing page. I've also just posted that 8-pager that I did for Graham way back in, I think 2018 or 2017. It's just a very nice focus at Namibia, but obviously relevant for other countries. Just what is the process, how does it work, and how can you get involved? Okay, are there any other questions or comments? raise your hand or post it in the chat.
Steve, while we wait for the questions, if you may allow me to just raise something. We ran a poll a couple of minutes ago trying to gauge interest on those who are interested on being in the working group, and a vast majority said that they were. So if you go to the chat function, there's going to be a message from Saya Events with a WhatsApp link. Please may you use that link to join the working group. And for those who are still unsure, because this seems very abstract and technical, just to reassure you that this is a process of learning for all of us, and we will be using various other platforms to engage, discuss, and see how we can make aspects of the APRM process digestible and how we can apply it to the South African context in understanding governance issues and also in developing the submission. So this is a process for all of us, and we'd like to start the informal aspects of the process through a WhatsApp group and further our discussions there. So if you're interested in joining the working group, please go to the chat function, see a message sent by Saya Events, and please follow that link. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Luanda. Last chance for people to raise questions or comments. We've thrown quite a lot of information at you, but I think if I can also just thank the presenters. I think very nice, short, sharp interventions that were very relevant. And it's always good to learn from other countries. Okay, if there isn't anything further, I'm going to hand over to Tessa to give a kind of summary and her final remarks and talk us through what's next. Over to Tessa.
Hi, everyone. So this is Tessa Dooms. I'm from Tshefuta Consulting, and we're the local partner for the Saya APRM youth-focused process. And so I wanted to give people a sense of why this process is going the way it is and what to expect next. Firstly, I think this is the first time Saya has run this entire process from beginning to end on virtual platforms. And so we're learning as we go about what works, about how to adapt the process, and how to keep people on board. And so we're seeing kind of fluctuating interest and fluctuating understanding of the process. But that's something that we intend to work on quite hard to make sure that people who are interested are able to understand the process from end to end. So please expect communication in the next week that will explain the process end to end much more clearly from our side in terms of the South Africa process. We also intend to be very hands-on in terms of organizations that get involved, particularly with the reference group and leading this process. As was said earlier today, this is a process about both having a reference group that we start off with, but also a process that involves the organizations and the young people who get involved in organizing to get information out to other people, to other young people, to other citizens about this process, and to really build up an energy around the APRM submission beyond just the people who participate directly in this group and in this program. And so if you're interested in participating, realize that it's both a process of participating in a submission, but also a process of getting other citizens on board and involved in this kind of process and in the submission. And I think the final thing that I wanted to highlight was based on what Lennon and Thulani have both said at different times today. I think the first thing to realize is that processes like this APRM submission, are ways for us to engage on policy issues and have both the country and a body in the continent hear the perspectives of young people in terms of what they think needs to be done and how government is faring the things that it's trying to accomplish. And I think it's an important way for us to engage, an important way for us to gather perspectives and views, and to make attempts at advocating for change. And we should use that, especially when we have a process like this that is legitimized, that government has seen results from before, and really use it as an opportunity. But also I see in the work that Lennon is doing a real opportunity for us also, because we're the first country that's doing this process with a youth focus in terms of the SIA engagements, for us to lend support to the work that Lennon is doing in strengthening the youth arm and the youth division within the APRM. And perhaps even from our process, being able to lend some support and lend some lessons and lend some ideas to the toolkit that's being developed and that will be finalized early next year. So if the toolkit doesn't exist, we have an opportunity here to create a process that could potentially actually enhance that toolkit, because we will be doing a youth version of this, unlike has been done ever before. And so we have a potential of both having an impact on the country, but also having an impact on the APRM and the APRM process, and strengthening youth participation in that process. And so I want to encourage people who are engaged in this process right now, engaged in this conversation, to consider it an opportunity to do both of those things. The third aspect of it, of course, is personal growth and organizational growth. And as somebody who's run a youth organization before myself, I know the benefit that can come from engaging your organization in this kind of work that's quite niche and unique and comes once in a while, but is a process that's really part of the bigger machinery of our policy making and advocacy work. And so there's a growth opportunity for individual young people, I think, in this process, but also potentially for the organizations to grow in your advocacy stature and to grow in your advocacy knowledge. And so I look forward to the process going forward. I look forward to us coming up with sets of interventions that and evaluations that are useful to the country, and really energizing the country around being able to use these kind of platforms and making them stick, making the recommendations that we have stick. So that's where I'll leave my thoughts, but just to re-emphasize that in the next week, please expect more communication from us, expect more clarity, expect more information bites like the 8-pager, perhaps in different formats that are more youth-friendly, to give us much clarity about the process going forward, and hopefully to have you and your organizations journey with us for the next few months. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Tessa. Thank you very, very much. It just remains for me to say thank you. The first huge thank you is to Luanda for really running with this and putting it together and getting such a great audience. Then to thank our speakers, Thulani, Patrick, Maipelo, Graham, Susan, and Helena, and Lennon, sorry, who I've left out. And then the back end, thank you very much to Sarasa and Ndumi for running the webinar. It was a very rich discussion. Thank you very much. There's just a question, Tessa, maybe before you go. Is there not a WhatsApp number that we can join? Because some people all seem to be having trouble with the link. Is there a WhatsApp number for the group?
So the link, if you just tap the link will take you straight to the WhatsApp group. So you don't need the number. But if you need a number, I will give you my number and I can then add you.
Please.
So I'll put my number into the chat.
Into the chat. Perfect. Thank you. Luanda, any final comments?
No, Steve, I'm covered by what Tessa has said and what you have said, wrapping up. A huge thank you to all those who participated. And if you feel anxious because you feel very confused about the process, I urge you and encourage you not to, but to just journey with us, and we will all understand the process together.
Okay, guys. So there, Tessa has put her number in. So if you'd like to join the group, please send her a WhatsApp. And we are planning to use WhatsApp quite extensively in discussions and so forth. So I would urge you to do so. And have a lovely day further, and look after yourselves, be safe, and you'll hear from us within the next week. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, bye-bye.
Bye, Steve.
Bye-bye, guys.